Diane Barrett with the BE Collection. I'm here today with Martha Wheelock, and it is 9/15/2023. So thank you for being a part of the collection.
Happy to be here.
Yes. And let's start with your occupation, since many times I forget to ask that question.
Well, now I'm sort of retired. I have been a high school and college teacher in American literature, mostly women's studies and ethics. And my recent job was at the Harvard Westlake School in Los Angeles. And then my other job, which is labor of love, is as a documentary filmmaker and a promoter of women's history throughout the country, and an activist.
Great. You were a busy woman. You're not retired.
No, I'm not.
I have found that we don't retire. We just keep on to the next project.
We, as teachers say, we don't retire. We just lose our class.
Right. Sometimes that's good. So anyway, how you heard about the collection from Margie Alexander, who's a great supporter of ours, and we appreciate that. And where were you born is my first question now.
I'm a New England girl from Exeter, New Hampshire. My ancestors actually came over on the Arabella in 1630, so I'm a pilgrim.
You are.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do special pilgrim events?
Excuse me?
Do you do pilgrim events?
Oh, well, we celebrate Thanksgiving with great charm. Yeah, right.
How many in your family? Do you have siblings?
I have a younger sister, 4 years younger than me, and that's it. One cousin, not a big family.
Mm-hmm. So,
one niece and one
years, what's your most interesting that piqued your interest currently?
Most interesting what?
Most interesting career that you've developed.
Oh,
historically for
well,
yourself.
That's like asking who's your favorite child or what's your favorite, this or that. I have intersected all of them together. As a teacher, I learned certain things that I want to pursue as a filmmaker. That as a filmmaker, I bring that back to the classroom. So, but I think basically my overall career is being constantly curious and wanting always to be creative around that curiosity, and having the courage to go into what I don't know and learn from it. And that's a career in and of itself.
How did you teach yourself filmmaking or learn it?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I'll answer briefly if I can.
No,
I was writing my PhD thesis at New York University, and my specialty was studying the literature of America. And my thesis, I found a writer that I really responded to, and her name is May Sarton. And May Sarton was an out, as of 1965, she was an out lesbian writer, but she was also very beloved as a poet and memoirist, and kept many people's lives together by how she looked at solitude, how she looked at being accepting. And then she was also a novelist. So I was privileged when I wrote her to get to be a personal biographer of hers, a critical biography. But I brought this back to NYU, and they said, oh, that's too appreciative. You've got to be more critical of her writing and everything. Why don't you do Ernest Hemingway? Right. And I said, I have no interest in doing Ernest Hemingway. And when you're doing a PhD, it has to be discipline. That's what the D in PhD stands for, PhD discipline. And I said, I'm not going to spend my life working on something. So I started to write my dissertation, And every time I would go before the board on a certain chapter, they'd say, "Oh, you have to rewrite that. That's not, you say was that she had a difficulty, and that's not critical enough." And so I would go back for maybe about a year, working on chapter after chapter, interviewing May Sarton, actually visiting with her in York, Maine. And finally, they kept saying, "Well, we just can't accept this thesis. It's not by our rules." And I was getting more and more impatient, and it was before computers, so you had to type it with erasable bond and erasable. Ugh, it was awful. And so I finally had the courage to stand up and say, I've had enough of your patriarchal standards of what's valuable in terms of looking at how a writer finds her voice, and especially now in the 1970s, we women are not going to use your language, guys. So you can take your thesis and put it somewhere else, but I'm going off and doing my own thesis. And that's when I learned through a friend of mine who was also at NYU how to make a documentary film. So I turned my thesis work into a documentary film called The World of Light, a portrait of May Sarton. It was an overwhelmingly wonderful experience. It made me become a filmmaker. But of course, in those days, it was not video, it was all 16 millimeter film. And it was expensive. So I used to do like on the sidewalks and on modern language poetry readings and things to raise money for it. But we did it. And what was the great justice of the whole thing was that NYU ended up purchasing 16 millimeter films for their uh, for their school. And if I just finished the thesis, it would have had mold on it in the library. So
I
from
know.
then I worked with May Sarton um, until she died. I took care of her in her last year of life,
Wow.
and we were very close. And I learned a great deal from her. She was a very irascible person, but she also got over that quickly and became a very loving person. So I'm grateful for her. I've had some beautiful experiences, and as I said to you, I've put this film called World of Light, a portrait of May Sarton, on my YouTube channel, and I will send you that link so you can post it with this interview so anybody can go and see it and know that May Sarton was one of our great, great foremothers of lesbian fiction. And she was fired from her position for being a lesbian. She didn't really discuss it outwardly as openly as we do now, but she would use like a letter L or something like that, and the in crowd knew what she was talking about, but she could sneak in a lot of her point of view because she was not radical, except she wrote a beautiful book that many of our generation knows, called Mrs. Stevens. Here's the Mermaid Singing. And that book presented for the woman writer a woman muse. In other words, you could be the inspiration for poetry could be a woman, just as the men like Robert Graves had the muse as a woman. And it was quite radical in the 60s for women to write about the woman who created their art form. Of course, Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas had been doing it for years, and Radcliffe Hall in England had a woman muse for which she was arrested and banned and ostracized. So my work with May Sarton was a way of opening my own eyes to the way that particularly lesbian writers and lesbians in general have been barred from using their voices in the early days. And thank goodness we can now say the L word without too much shame.
How are they barred?
Well, you mean in the olden days? The olden days. Well,
Right.
I actually was asked to leave a school because they suspected that I was having a lesbian relationship. As I said, May Sarton was fired for being a lesbian from, I think it was not Barnard, Brandeis University in Boston. Um, there was, of course, the horrible act here in California. Um, please forgive me for not remembering what it was called, but it was in the name of a man that said that if you were a lesbian or gay man, you could not teach, you could not be a fireman, and that was in the late '60s. Someone will remember what it was. Hey, that wasn't the Hayes Act, but it was a petition on our on our ballot here in California. And then, of course, there was Proposition 8 that came along, which was bankrolled and promoted by the uh, Mormons mostly, and went down in defeat because it was poorly written. If you had to vote, people thought they had to vote yes on it to get it to pass, but you had to vote no on it to get it passed. And those were all laws against and rules against. This is before the Supreme Court allowed us to get married. So there was a lot of hidden agenda for sure. And so people didn't announce it. I mean, I never announced to my students that I was a lesbian unless somebody asked me. And so that's sort of how I think we were shaking sometimes when we were going to be discovered.
Right. People lost their licenses and everything.
Yeah.
Difficult time. I like the use of your word "for mothers." I never used before. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So you were really a busy woman. You still are. We are. I read a book about the generations before ours. We're, documenting in our voices our current generation, which is good. And
Yeah.
different, but it's still difficult.
And you might remember, I don't know whether you were affected by this book or not, called Sappho Was a Right-On Woman
Oh, and
by
I
Barbara Love
haven't.
and Sidney Abbott. And Barbara Love just departed and went over the Rainbow Bridge about 6 months ago. And there's a memorial for her coming up very soon. But anyway, those women had the right to do it, and I had that book, and I kept it under my covers because I ended up getting married because I was so afraid that I would not be
Yeah.
accepted. So I was married, um, uh, and in that marriage, I was threatened by my husband, who himself was a closeted gay man. Uh, because he was from North Dakota and needed to have his family approve of him. So he got married and to me, but he said at one time, he said, if I find you in bed with a man, I'll kill him. But if I find you in bed with another woman, I'll kill you both. And because he was
Really?
so
What a
scared
nice
that
guy.
I might find something. And I was married for five years, and then after that, I couldn't live the hypocrisy. So I did leave, and there's a lot of women of my particular generation who ended up getting married because it
Right.
was the right and proper thing, or because they wanted children, or whatever. And when I couldn't have children, I said, "Why should I go through this institution? Why should I be married? This is not going to work." So that was a real liberation for me.
You'll
And
find as you read back in the interviews we've done, many of the women like yourself were married, many had children. One woman went through conversion therapy.
oh wow,
She documented for us separately her experience with that. She also had children, and now she's in a lesbian relationship happily.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's
So
gone through a
you
lot.
know, I mentioned a Time magazine picture, which I will send to you of so I left my marriage in 1972, and in 1974, which was or 1973, there were a couple of gay marches, Christopher Street marches in New York City after the great Christopher Street Revolution of '69. And so I really had to make a statement to myself. So I went to the march and I carried a sign that said Mother Nature is a lesbian.
Ah,
And you can insert that picture. But the reason I said that was because there was a great uh, report, maybe 6 months before this, of a whole island of seagulls off the coast of Catalina Island. And they were having children, they were having babies, and they could find absolutely no male invasion there. They could find no evidence that there had been any male sperm or sperm, but basically, and that these female seagulls were procreating parthenogenically. Uh, and so I thought that was, I mean, who knows whether it was true or not, but I thought that was a great line for us women, that we could take that line and show, you know, we don't really need you guys. We can have our own lifestyle. So
That
I
research
carried
is
this
really,
line.
that's, we believe that. I mean, it's out there. It's,
Yeah.
that's
And
great. That's
it's
good. I didn't know that part of the story though.
and in Greek mythology, of course, there was the island of Lesbos, and Sappho the poet, and they had children there. Now, how that happened, and then the Amazons is another story of how they had a whole island of women, and they. I could tell you that whole story, but we won't go into that. But anyway, so soon after that march in Time magazine, there was a big cover, and it was about Matlovich, and Matlovich was a lieutenant in the army. He was the very first uh, person in the army to be kicked out of the army because he was gay. And it was a big hue and cry. It was horrible. And it was at the time when the AIDS epidemic was just getting some kind of recognition, and therefore they were going to say that we were heathens and from the devil and all of that. And I opened the magazine because I got it in my mailbox as a teacher in New York City. And there on the page, under this article, was a picture of me carrying the sign that said Mother
Great.
Nature was a lesbian. And so I had no choice but to confront it. And my mother and father, whom I had not told about any of my desires, they were wonderfully liberal people, but they were also, rather New England conventional. So I had to make an appointment with them. I drove up to see them in New Hampshire, and and there, of course, on their coffee table was the magazine with Matlovich on the cover, and I was sure they'd seen it. So I waited a couple of days before I broached it to them
Mentioned it.
because they didn't bring it up. And I said, "Mom and Dad, did you see the picture of me in Time magazine?" And my dad said, "Well, it looked an awful lot like you, but I didn't think you were carrying a sign like that." And I said, "Yes, that's me." And I have decided, I mean, I have acknowledged that I'm a lesbian. And my mother said, "Oh, I told you, if you'd married a real man, this never would have happened to you. I told you that man was not right. You would never, blah, blah, blah." In other words, she attacked the husband that I had had.
Mhm.
And my father, who was a Latin and Greek professor and great classicist, looked at the picture again, and he said, "You know what, Martha? It's just like Socrates and Alcibiades." Now, the only reference he had for why two people of the same sex would come together was his ancient Greek tradition, that the great Socrates, the Greek philosopher, had young men around him, and he taught young men, and they had what was called platonic love. They had really what was homosexual love. But the reason I tell this story is because everybody has to understand same sex attractions from their own point of
Your own
view.
vantage point, right?
Yeah, my mother saw it as a deficit in the kind of marriage I had, which was valid. It just was, it just was a little sharp, right? But my father, who was a kind of a milk toast professor and a really gentle guy, he knew it from what he knew as a fifth century Greek phenomenon. This was
Mhm.
always happening. It's been there since Sappho and Plato and Socrates and those people. So, and it was a beautiful acknowledgement of how you understand your friends, your parents, your children, that you take it to whatever you could say. Oh, it reminds me of the girl next door, or something like that. Whatever reference point you have that brings understanding to it is I think, a valid recognition.
I like
And it's like
that.
coming out to say,
They must have
"Mommy, it's
had a
just."
very interesting relationship. Did they?
Yeah.
Your mom and dad?
Yes. Yeah, they were polar opposites.
Right. So at what
So,
point did you realize that you were a lesbian or a little bit different than the average girl, so to speak?
well, I at one point we had a little farm in upstate New York. My parents did, and I was about 14 or so. And my mother kept saying that there was this helper, an orphan girl who lived next door, worked on the farm, and she was could work like any man. She was better than any man. She could lift more bales of hay than those guys. And she might be one of those, what do you call those women, those lesbians. And so I became fascinated because I loved her. She was about, oh, she maybe have been 18 or so, and I was 14, and there was no attraction there, but I became fascinated by the fact she could do more work than the men. And she was her own independent source. And uh, and then I started to look at that. I don't know whether I ever really came to that conclusion until, um, I knew I tried to be heterosexual, and it just wasn't worked, and I was more emotionally attracted to women. And so it wasn't until that's why I was attracted to May Sarton versus Ernest Hemingway.
Right.
Yeah,
So any knowledge
but I
of
had crushes.
sex
I
life
had a
in your
lot of
family?
crushes. And I had crushes, and I was certainly a tomboy, and uh, I could see that they got to play on the ball on the teams that I couldn't play on. So there was a lot of civil or political. I'm sorry, my nose is driving me crazy. Okay.
So were there any homosexuals in your family, biologic, genetic
Not
links?
that, not that I know of, but my father had a very close relationship with his colleague, and they would go on classical trips together. And stuff. So I don't think there was anything there, but it was a potential of understanding also from that.
Mhm. You never know, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Interesting. But my sister was always a big fan of whoever I was, even though because she was a very progressive thinker.
So how about you personally?
You
But you're a really interesting person in terms of experience and just who you are. Has anybody done your whole life in an interview or written a book? This kind of thing.
Well,
I'm
uh,
serious.
I've done a number of interviews, and I can't remember when they became. I've done one for the Veteran Feminists of America of my feminist activism. It's on their website. Um, and I continue to do, as an educator. My last job, I was a what do you call it, a co-colleague of the gay and lesbian group. I ran the ecology club. I taught women's studies. I've always been at this point, I've always been, into education and that's certainly what a filmmaker does. I must say, I'm probably more interested and more active now on women's equality, because it includes us all, the ERA, and my films have been on how women won the right to vote, but that includes us other gals too. So it was part of that. I've written on how I made the film on May Sarton, which kind of it's in a book called Between Women, and that's what I referred to before as a women artists, women creators having a muse who is a woman, and uh, how that is a very generating force in a person's life. And I'm I partnered with three other women. Um, my a longtime partnership with Kay Weaver, who was a singer and songwriter. And when I heard her film called One Fine Day, I made a film of that with her, and we went on to make several other films. Um, and the woman who taught me how to make the May Sarton film is now in memory care, but we are a family. All of these women that I have been creative with have become, we're bonded for the rest of our
Right,
life.
right.
Um, and it's a chosen family, and I'm aware of how I am called upon now to care for my older sisters, as it were,
Uh,
who are starting to fail and get dementia or need care, and it's just a blessed act that I'm able to do now. So it's how it goes on.
But it has, going back to my question, has anyone really gathered, you could do it, but I think it'd be really fascinating for others to take your life and encapsulate it and record it. And,
Well,
so,
there's
because
a
one of
there's
the
a
things that we
it's
started with this was we wanted it to be a little different for a young lesbian, for example, to say, gee, maybe I want to make films. What's the step? What steps do I take? Does my sexuality impede me? This kind of stuff. And knowing that women have to look at the fact they have to support themselves, most of them, financially.
right,
And
right.
it's a little
Yeah.
different.
Well, I think that the younger women coming up, and I've been a mentor to several women, young
Mhm.
women, who've worked with me on films um, and on projects to do activism. Um, that I just hope they fall into what I would call obsession, because when you have obsession
Right,
with
I
something,
know.
like what you do, and to understand what drives a person to have a labor of love, it really is. That's what documentary filmmaking is, and I certainly have not been able to always put bread and butter on my table because of it. But usually, because I'm so obsessed, I'll do a GoFundMe or do something of that sort that
Does that work?
keeps. Oh yeah, sure,
Good.
sure, but it takes a lot of work, and
Uh,
um, I have a very you'll probably be getting one of my newsletters. I send out newsletters about what we're doing so that people can be part of us.
right.
And that's my film company is called Wild West Women, so that I keep a little bit of that tiger in my tank.
You'll be hearing
uh,
from some of the women we've interviewed, and Lauren Lloyd is a producer, and she does a lot of editing for us, and I'm sure she'll be happy to be able to
we
contact.
should have a big party on your patio with all the women that you've interviewed.
It's coming right before Halloween, so just talked about it this morning. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
That's
Halloween.
no, that's great. I think it would be a very valuable thing because we kind of I now basically live alone, but that's just because I put my partner of mine in memory care. But
Awful.
it's a little harder nowadays to get the connections, and so that would be great. Oh, good. And there's a certain age of I without hesitation will tell you I'm going to be 82, and so it's wonderful to find women who have the same framework of history,
Right.
because not only do you share that history, but it also is a support for where you are now and how you've gotten there. I just did a wonderful. I'm now the president of the board of the National Women's History Alliance, which
Mhm.
has been for 43 years. We've been promoting and spreading and helping people with National Women's History Month and Women's Equality Day, and just finding our history. And a large part of the history, of course, are women who never married, who are known under their own name or their partner's name. And in those days, I mean, when you talk about great historical people like Jane Addams and Willa Cather, and people who had to burn women who had to burn the letters so nobody knew who they were. There's a great history, um, and of course, there's been Lillian Faderman has done some wonderful history books of women's contribution to America. But in that, uh, I don't know if you've ever heard of Arden Eversole. She had a
Yeah.
lesbian archives. down in, or is it upstate? But she just died a couple of months ago, and
So
the
did
out
she work with Margaret Purcell on that book? It's a generation before ours, really. Were they
I
lesbians? I just heard
hers. I don't think hers was a book. I think it was What You Do, but it was a different part of the state.
California.
I'll send you her information.
Okay,
She's now deceased, as I said, and but you get a kick out of the memorial they did for her. And I'll tell you what you do is very important, because telling the story not only it gives me more empowerment, because it regenerates my own desire
right.
to go on and doing work. But as you said, it gives the younger people, the younger women, a context, so that they know that what they do is not to let what we've done fall by the wayside, that they have to stand on our shoulders and they have to continue the work, because obviously nowadays there's much more of the rights that are being threatened from all that we've gained, and that we always stood in line for and all we marched for. And I didn't miss a Christopher Street March, Gay Pride March ever. For I haven't been in one in about 5 years. But out here in California, they call it a parade. But in New York City, we were
I don't think
marching.
so. Some of ours.
And I worked in the AIDS movement. I worked in ACT UP, and you know, and of course sometimes the women did more work than the men did, and the risks they took in that movement, because you know uh, it
Are you
was
familiar with Chris Brownlee Hospice here in Legion Park?
oh yeah, right,
Okay,
yeah.
I volunteered there as a nurse, but we have a lot of stories to share. But one of the first parade I ever went to was when I was in training to be a counselor, and I went with one of my co-students, and he said, "Oh, he was a teacher. I'm so worried they're gonna out me, and then I'll lose my job." It was
Yep.
70s, so we were there about 5 minutes, and one of his students said, "Hi, Mr. Bass." So
uh
he lived through it,
yeah.
but it was a frightening time and an exciting time. All same
And so you're a
theology.
Californian.
Mhm.
You're a Californian, and,
Oh,
and you were
I'm from
you were a teacher.
Chicago originally,
Oh, you're
but
from
I've been in
Chicago, yeah.
California a very long time and I like it. It's a good
Hmm.
place for me. Yeah.
Have you done your interview?
Yes. We've done
Good.
150 or so interviews. I encourage you to look at all of them. We've interviewed everybody that wants to be interviewed.
Oh,
My
great.
partners, we do couples
And
interviews. We do special interviews like your response to the Roe v. Wade. Um, we we have a section of it'll list on our webpage, and you can select what you'd like to be interviewed, what you'd like interviewed to see. But they're fascinating and really interesting women. Medical people, tradeswomen, judges, politicians.
yep,
Any that
yep.
wants to sit here, I'm happy to meet them, and it's exciting. I like
And that's available online. I can go
right.
to your
We have a
website.
webpage, B-E collection, and
B dash. Okay, great. B dash D as in dog.
E E. My name is Barrett. My partner's name is Elfring, ELF. So it's B-E collection.com.
Collection. Okay, great.
.org.
Wow.
Sorry, I was corrected. It's .org. I made that
That
mistake.
org.
Yeah.
Because I think all this information was in that pretty little envelope you sent, and I
We have
probably mailed
more.
it back to you.
Just let me know what you would need and we'll send more. But we're
Right.
people with interesting stories. I love people's
And
stories.
I think that as we get in our upward years, we need to know whether, okay, so I'm single now. Should I even try to see that if there's a soulmate in my window?
You never
Things
know.
that, yeah, you never know. And there's a difference in age, because and age is not the marker nowadays. It's the health level for
Yeah.
many of us. because there were a lot of women younger than me that are not as functioning, and so
Right.
it's also that camaraderie. Like, what are you going through, and what have you learned from it, so that
Mhm.
I can I can learn from you. You know.
Right.
So
That's we need that because otherwise our time is limited. So I think I'm on the speed reading track. I always was attracted to it. I didn't do too well at it, but we need that
yeah,
information. And especially with having your partner go into a special care unit must be awful.
yeah.
Was it
Well,
awful?
no, no, it's now it's good. Now it's a
Is
blessing
it? Yeah.
because I could have gone, and she at that point was just a very close friend, and she lived with me for a while, and I took care of her. But it was difficult, and you know, and then they use this word. If you look at any of the shows on the blue zones, which are how to live to 100, the component that's always in there is have a good family, keep your family together. So
Mhm.
what we have to do as lesbians is
That's right.
redefine that, and know that it's the community. And it's for some women it's really hard to reach out. They get depressed, they get isolated. And I think that one of the activist elements of being, let's say, what Sarton said was over 80, is the art of aging must include some kind of connections and community, and make a little effort toward having the Halloween party so that people can have
Right.
even more connections,
I'm good for Halloween
you
party.
know? Yeah.
Yeah. No,
So,
I believe in that too. I just we're concerned because I remember talking to my mom and I said, "What about your bridge friends?" She said, "They're all dead." That was my mother was very, and it's sad. And yet it's a scare because none of us wants to be alone. And our own biologic families aren't always a place to go for that support.
right, right. Or the nearby. And we don't have, but most of us don't have children
Right.
that we can rely on or not rely on, as the case may be.
Uh,
Sometimes they're no help.
right. No,
Um,
it's a it's a changing world and we're in it. But we have to
but
write
I
it.
have a dog. Do you have a dog?
Have a cat.
You have a cat. Well, that's good. But I have a dog.
I
He's
saw
not
that
here
dog
now.
walking behind you,
I
guarding
mean,
you.
that is a blessing. I would just love him, and he makes me walk. I do as much exercise as I can as I get a little more arthritic, but and travel and stuff like that. And he's my buddy.
Is he? No,
Yeah,
there's a lot of senior lesbian groups. Have you joined any of them?
uh, I I know about OLOC, but
Right,
that's all over the country. But I
right.
haven't belonged to any here in Los Angeles, so that's I don't know of any really here.
I was going to advertise, but we haven't advertised this at all. But I was going to put a little statement on some group. I haven't done that yet, but there are a lot of them all over. And some
Hmm.
women we've interviewed are very active in the starting of them. We have You'll meet a lot of activists as you go through the interviews. You're
Oh,
gonna
good.
You're gonna see names right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Right.
fun. It's really fun.
Great. Great.
So
Wow. Well,
let's
this
stay
is
in
this is
touch. Remember to
yeah.
get
I
our
look forward to meeting you.
likewise, and we'll talk about that Halloween thing.
And if you find any young lesbians who are questioning their productivity or questioning their importance to the world, and they want to, work with me on any projects, I'd be very glad to be a mentor or something like that.
That's great. Let me tell you, we have been involved in Mount Washington as a resident in and out for years, my partner and I. And a young woman that we knew as a child, when we came back for a total, we're going to stay here now the rest of our life. Her mom called me and said that was a lesbian. And I said, well, great, happy for you. It's sort of a conversation stopper. And then she said she tried to kill herself, and she was
Yeah.
in UCLA Medical Center.
Mm.
She survived. She went to the center here in Hollywood. And I thought, if she knew us, but she was like 4 or 5 at that time. But if we could connect with one person, doesn't have to be young or old or whatever age, and they could not kill themselves, this whole effort.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
and now she's thriving, but getting past that was a real difficult time.
Right.
And,
Right. By the way, I have 2 friends in Mount Washington, Erica Silverman and Linda Torn. Do you know them?
nope.
They live up in the really end of a road where there's a park next to them, an Audubon Park or something like that.
Oh, that Deb's Park. It's a bird thing.
Yeah, the
Okay.
bird thing. Yeah,
Right. It's the other side of the.
and they're wonderful. They've been a partner for a long, long time. So
Okay,
that's
they should
another
come to the
possibility
Halloween
for you.
party, and they should
Yeah,
definitely. Maybe we'll set up an interview. I love that. That's just how it works.
yeah, right. Oh, great. Well, Diane, thank you for asking me to be a part
Yeah.
of this project, and I look forward to looking at all the other women. And let me know if I can be of any kind of resource for you.
Good. There's a hospice. Not that I want to end on this, but there is a hospice group on our collection, nurses and
Oh,
just talking about
great.
it. So
Great.
we're educating, informing, and reaching out.
Yeah.
If
It's
you
just
knew you
like
were
those old days.
What?
Go ahead.
If
Sorry,
you
go
knew
ahead.
you were going to die shortly, what would you like to be remembered for?
I asked May Sarton the same question, so I think
Did
in a
you?
way,
Huh.
yeah, I did right at the end of the film. And she said, I'd like to be remembered for being fully human if I am.
Wow, that's
And
a nice
I
statement.
think that's a great answer.
Uh,
And I would, I think that fits my bill too, to be fully human, to be trying to be understanding, to be I'd like to be remembered for being curious and courageous.
that's good. Actually, could be on a shirt, not a t-shirt. I don't wear t-shirts. Isn't courageous. All right. So thank you. We'll see each other.
Thank you, Diane.
Okay. Have a
See
good
you at Halloween.
I know. It's close. Bye.
Yeah. Goodbye.